Penguin Random House Audio presents The Botany of Desire, A Plant's Eye View of the World. This is the author, Michael Pollan. For my parents, who never doubted, or if they did, never let it show, and my grandfather, with gratitude. Acknowledgements. I had a great deal of help in the making of this book at every step of the way. My thanks first to all the people who gave so generously of their time and knowledge while I was reporting and researching the project. Ever since I started writing books a dozen or so years ago, I've had the privilege and even greater pleasure of working with Anne Godoff. Indeed, by now, I can't imagine writing a book without the net of her wisdom, trust, and friendship. My literary agent, Amanda Urban, has also been there since the beginning. She knew before anyone else that The Botany of Desire was the book I should be writing, and straight through, her judgment on all matters has been indispensable. Mark Edmondson has also had a hand in all three of my books, though for no other reason but friendship. He read the manuscript with great care and intelligence, parts of it more than once, and every page he touched he made better. Just as important, though, have been the sympathetic ear and priceless reading suggestions he offered along the way. I've been incredibly fortunate, too, to have the gifted editorial eye of Paul Tuff, who has gracefully morphed from student to teacher. His suggestions were invaluable. I also owe a large debt of gratitude to Marty Mellon at the Union of Concerned Scientists, who generously brought her scientific eye to bear on the manuscript, saving me from all manner of embarrassment. Whatever errors remain, however, are mine alone. My initial forays into the worlds of marijuana growing and genetically engineered potatoes were sponsored by the New York Times Magazine. Heartfelt thanks to Jerry Marzorati, Adam Moss, and Jack Rosenthal for their unstinting support and encouragement, as well as to Stephen Mim for his stellar research assistance. Carol Schneider, Robin Schiff, Benjamin Dreyer, Alexa Kasanos, and Kate Niedzwicki have been invaluable allies, as are always Jack Hitt, Mark Danner, and Alan Gerganis. Thanks also to Isaac Pollan for his encouragement and, on the bad days, his understanding and comfort. And finally, to Judith, who really comes first, because without her eye, ear, wisdom, support, patience, encouragement, discernment, foresight, confidence, companionship, judgment, clarity, humor, and love, none of this would ever have gotten done. Cornwall Bridge, Connecticut, October 2000. Introduction. The Human Bumblebee. The seeds of this book were first planted in my garden, while I was planting seeds, as a matter of fact. Sowing seed is pleasant, desultory, not terribly challenging work. There's plenty of space left over for thinking about other things while you're doing it. On this particular May afternoon, I happened to be sowing rows in the neighborhood of a flowering apple tree that was fairly vibrating with bees. And what I found myself thinking about was this. What existential difference is there between the human being's role in this or any garden and the bumblebees? If this sounds like a laughable comparison, consider what it was I was doing in the garden that afternoon. Disseminating the genes of one species and not another. In this case, a fingerling potato instead of, let's say, a leek. Gardeners like me tend to think such choices are our sovereign prerogative. In the space of this garden, I tell myself, I alone determine which species will thrive and which will disappear. I'm in charge here, in other words, and behind me stand other humans, still more in charge. The long chain of gardeners and botanists, plant breeders, and these days genetic engineers who selected, developed, or bred the particular potato that I decided to plant. Even our grammar makes the terms of this relationship perfectly clear. I choose the plants, I pull the weeds, I harvest the crops. We divide the world into subjects and objects, and here in the garden, as in nature generally, we humans are the subjects. But that afternoon in the garden, I found myself wondering, what if that grammar is all wrong? What if it's really nothing more than a self-serving conceit? A bumblebee would probably also regard himself as a subject in the garden, and the bloom he's plundering for its drop of nectar as an object. But we know that this is just a failure of his imagination. The truth of the matter is that the flower has cleverly manipulated the bee into hauling its pollen from blossom to blossom. The ancient relationship between bees and flowers is a classic example of what is known as coevolution. In a coevolutionary bargain, like the one struck by the bee and the apple tree, the two parties act on each other to advance their individual interests, but wind up trading favors: food for the bee, transportation for the apple genes. Consciousness need not enter into it on either side, and the traditional distinction between subject and object is meaningless. Matters between me and the spud I was planting, I realized, really aren't much different. We too are partners in a coevolutionary relationship, as indeed we have been ever since the birth of agriculture more than 10,000 years ago. Like the apple blossom, whose form and scent have been selected by bees over countless generations, the size and taste of the potato have been selected over countless generations by us, by Incas and Irishmen, even by people like me ordering French fries at McDonald's. Bees and humans alike have their criteria for selection: symmetry and sweetness in the case of the bee, heft and nutritional value in the case of the potato-eating human. The fact that one of us has evolved to become intermittently aware of its desires makes no difference whatsoever to the flower or the potato taking part in this arrangement. All those plants care about is what every being cares about on the most basic genetic level: making more copies of itself. Through trial and error, these plant species have found that the best way to do that is to induce animals, bees or people, it hardly matters, to spread their genes. How? By playing on the animal's desires, conscious and otherwise. The flowers and the spuds that manage to do this most effectively are the ones that get to be fruitful and multiply. So the question arose in my mind that day: did I choose to plant these potatoes, or did the potato make me do it? In fact, both statements are true. I can remember the exact moment that spud seduced me, showing off its knobby charms in the pages of a seed catalog. I think it was the tasty-sounding, buttery yellow flesh that did it. This was a trivial, semi-conscious event. It never occurred to me that our catalog encounter was of any evolutionary consequence whatsoever. Yet evolution consists of an infinitude of trivial, unconscious events, and in the evolution of the potato, my reading of a particular seed catalog on a particular January evening counts as one of them. That May afternoon, the garden suddenly appeared before me in a whole new light. The manifold delights it offered to the eye and nose and tongue no longer quite so innocent or passive. All these plants, which I'd always regarded as the objects of my desire, were also, I realized, subjects, acting on me, getting me to do things for them they couldn't do for themselves. And that's when I had the idea. What would happen if we looked at the world beyond the garden this way, regarded our place in nature from the same upside-down perspective? This book attempts to do just that, by telling the story of four familiar plants: the apple, the tulip, cannabis, and the potato, and the human desires that link their destinies to our own. Its broader subject is the complex reciprocal relationship between the human and natural world, which I approach from a somewhat unconventional angle. I take seriously the plant's point of view. The four plants whose stories this book tells are what we call domesticated species, a rather one-sided term, that grammar again, that leaves the erroneous impression that we're in charge. We automatically think of domestication as something we do to other species, but it makes just as much sense to think of it as something certain plants and animals have done to us, a clever evolutionary strategy for advancing their own interests. The species that have spent the last 10,000 or so years figuring out how best to feed, heal, clothe, intoxicate, and otherwise delight us have made themselves some of nature's greatest success stories. The surprising thing is, we don't ordinarily regard species like
Sample complete. Ready to continue?